Now, in a strong message on terrorism, India's External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar said on Saturday that no rhetoric can ever justify terrorist acts, and nations who backed extremists can never have good reputation. Jaishankar made the statement during his address at the United Nations General Assembly. In his address to the world body, he also reaffirmed India's zero-tolerance approach towards terrorism.
Having borne the brunt of cross-border terrorism for decades, India firmly advocates a zero-tolerance approach. In our view, there is no justification for any act of terrorism regardless of motivation, and no rhetoric, however sanctimonious, can ever cover up bloodstains. The United Nations responds to terrorism by sanctioning its perpetrators, those who politicize the UNSC 1267 sanctions regime, sometimes even to the extent of defending proclaimed terrorists. They do so at their own peril.
This was a strong, though veiled attack against Pakistan and its ally China that has on multiple occasions blocked bids and proposals by India and its allies to designate Pakistan-based terrorists. While talking about India's position in the ongoing Ukraine conflict, Jaishankar said that India is on the side that respects the United Nations Charter and its founding principles.
As the Ukraine conflict continues to rage, we are often asked, whose side are we on? And our answer each time is straight and honest. India is on the side of peace and will remain firmly there. We are on the side that respects the UN Charter and its founding principles.
India's External Affairs Minister also met with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Saturday to discuss bilateral ties between both countries. The face-to-face meeting took place on the sidelines of the UNGA session. Jaishankar characterized the talks as wide-ranging on Twitter, saying that they discussed bilateral cooperation and also exchanged views on Ukraine war and the United Nations reforms.
That there's virtually no domain on which we are not cooperating.
And for more on this, WION Principal Diplomatic Correspondent Siddhant Sibol is joining us live from New Delhi. Hi, Siddhant. One of the sticking points for India at the United Nations was the cross-border terrorism issue and claims of neighbors breaching the United Nations Charter. Why has this issue dragged on for this long, and what sort of assistance is India seeking from the United Nations?
Well, when it comes to India's goals at the United Nations on the issue of terrorism, it is basically listing off terrorists, a lot of terrorists, of course, in the region, especially from Pakistan. And India has tried, along with allies, to list 3 Pakistan-based terrorists this year. But we know that China has blocked it. Now, this speech, this 17 minutes long speech by the Indian External Affairs Minister, focused on several things. But above all, it sent a message to both Islamabad and Beijing on several counts. Now, when it comes to Pakistan, 2 things are important. First, of course, the issue of counter-terrorism. There was a specific mention on how terrorism is a worry for the region. But the second point is very interesting, given that there was not a single mention of Pakistan, the word Pakistan, by the Indian External Affairs Minister. Unlike, of course, the Pakistani Foreign Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who almost mentioned India 9 times and Kashmir over 12 times. On China, 4 counts we saw that the Indian External Affairs Minister slammed China. First, of course, China blocking listing of Pakistan-based terrorists. The Indian External Affairs Minister said that there should not be any politicization. Secondly, on blocking the reforms at the United Nations Security Council, we know that China is the only country at the Security Council which has not publicly backed India's bid for an expanded United Nations Security Council. The third, stability of the Indo-Pacific. That's a message to Beijing, which has been very aggressive with India at the borders. We know the Galwan incident is something that is an incident which, of course, led to relationship nose-diving because of the aggressive actions by the Chinese. India lost 20 of its soldiers. And fourthly, and perhaps most importantly, the Indian External Affairs Minister talked about debt crisis, calling it precarious in the region. Now, in the region, we know countries like China, countries like Sri Lanka have been facing a lot of economic issues, and everyone, of course, have been blaming China for that, given that both these countries had taken a lot of money in terms of building infrastructure.
Right.
But ultimately, today, they are saddled with a lot of loans and, of course, going to IMF to get a bailout. So, a lot of focus in terms of sending message to both Islamabad and Beijing, but also talking about India's aspiration, how India is keen when it comes to the world, how India can play a constructive role, and also mentioned Ukraine and its fallout as well on food and commodity prices.
Let's talk about Ukraine, and the minister also met Russia's Sergei Lavrov. From the brief, it is said that both focused on bilateral ties, whereas at the UNGA, Minister S Jaishankar reiterated that India was not taking sides and maintains the path to diplomacy. What do you read from the two distinct developments?
Well, Eric, the Indian External Affairs Minister in his speech said something very important, and perhaps for the first time he said that in a very clear terms. He said that we are in the side of the countries that make sure that the UN Charter is preserved. That basically means that the territorial integrity of countries are preserved. In fact, when he was saying that, there was one shot of the Russian delegation as well. But largely, we know that India's policy when it comes to Ukraine has been on dialogue and diplomacy. India has emphasized on that multiple times, and Prime Minister's meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Samarkand is something that has been quoted many times by the Western leaders. In fact, the French President Macron referred to it during his UNGA statement, saying that, as my friend Prime Minister Modi said, that when it comes to this era, there should not be any war. And this is something that the Indian Prime Minister directly told to the Russian president. So largely, India is keen that there is an early resolution. And as a friend has explained this to Moscow several times, because now it's going to have its fallout. In fact, it's already having its fallout in terms of food prices, in terms of commodity prices, in terms of fuel prices, especially in the global south, where it's pinching the most. So India's focus is that when it comes to its fallout, it needs to be contained, and the invasion, the war needs to be stopped for the betterment of the world, which is already reeling under the catastrophic impact of the COVID pandemic.
Live from New Delhi, our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibol. Thank you. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.